When it comes down to Netflix, needless to say there's not really a whole lot that I enjoy from it. That's not to say that they're bad per se, they were just sorta there. And I thought it was because I didn't watch it as much when I was younger, and when I did, I would just watch the movies or TV shows that were made by it. But there was one Netflix film series that I would watch for hours and hours and never get sick of watching. That being the Babysitter movies. Being fairly young at the time, I was never really familiar with the franchise at all, so I thought I would never touch upon these movies. But that wasn't until 2 years after the first movie's release that I decided to give the first movie a chance. But you know what? I'm glad I started watching it. It was definitely the most satisfying thing ever. If you want to know how these films came to be, well, on November 24th, 2014, the script for the first movie was already made and has been brought by the film's director Mick G. That wasn't until December of 2016 that Netflix acquired distribution rights to the film from New Line Cinema, and was slated to release on October 13th, 2017. I never got the opportunity to see this movie during its release, but that was only because I was never really a fan of teen horror movies. But then I saw Summer of '84 and you can tell that it was heavily inspired by Stranger Things, and that got me into these types of movies. And out of all of these teen horror movies that I've seen, this movie would have to be the best of the bunch. But why is that? Well, today in this video, I'm gonna go over the first and second movie to see where they went wrong, where they went right, and what would be the possible future for the franchise. So without beating around the bush, here is the Babysitter retrospective. So the movie stars Cole Johnson, played by Judah Lewis, as he's seen as an outcast by all of his peers at school, and after getting bullied by his neighbors, his babysitter B, played by Samara Weaving, stands up for him and scares them off. Right from the beginning, you can see how B is just portrayed as this harmless teenager who seems to have a great bond with Cole. So then the two decide to hang out after Cole's parents were gonna stay at a hotel for the night. But after Cole heads off to bed, his best friend Melanie, played by Emily Antlin, encourages him to spy on B and see what she does during the night, where it was revealed that she has her high school friends over, played by Robbie Amell, Bella Thorne, Hannah Mae Lee, Doug Haley, and... wait, is that King Batch? So they're all playing Truth or Dare formatted as a game of spin the bottle. But after B kisses Samuel on a dare, she pulls 2 daggers from her behind and stabs him in the skull. This terrified me when I first saw it, especially considering the gore in that scene was a bit too much. I know that it's gonna make me sound like a coward considering that I was a teenager at the time watching this, but this moment right here made me shiver uncomfortably. But I had to continue watching it to see what would happen next. So after B kills Samuel, it's been revealed that she and her friends were members of a demonic cult, as they collect the blood from the victim's head. This petrified Cole as he runs upstairs to call 911, as he also prepares to escape the house. But then he pretends to fall asleep as the cult members enter his room to draw a sample of blood from him, causing him to pass out during his second attempt of escape. He then gets confronted by the cult members who tell him that they needed his blood for a science project, but it wasn't until the cops arrive that it results in them getting murdered. They then decide to kill Cole after finding out that he called the cops on them, and the rest of the film is spent on Cole trying to fight back against them. But that wasn't until he confronts B and threatens to burn her spellbook after being fed up with her and everyone else making his life hell. So B then explains to him that she was once insecure like he was until she made the deal with the devil to get whatever she wanted, by sacrificing innocent people and spilling their blood on an ancient book while reciting its verses. She then offers Cole to join her cult, but instead of Cole accepting it like a wimp, he makes a bold move and burns her book before running off and stealing Melanie's dad's car, so he can ram it into his house and onto her body. We then get to see their final farewell, leaving her to die, as Cole reunites with his parents. The movie then ends with him saying that he doesn't need a babysitter, although during the post-credits scene where B is revealed to be alive. My perspective on watching the movie for the first time and having to watch it many times after that has been the same, but like I said at the beginning, it was satisfying how I'd find myself to enjoy it. That's not to say that it is perfect from start to finish, there are some issues that I had with it. Firstly, the movie didn't take the time to introduce all the characters. Like, the only reason why B's friends were introduced was to set up the main conflict of the story, but the way they were introduced was basically just them hanging out at Cole's house while playing Spin the Bottle. Maybe if they were introduced better, it would have been done with each character, so that we can discover their distinct personalities. Speaking of personalities, I wasn't surprised that while half the characters have personalities, a lot of them don't. For example, Cole's bully Jeremy's main role in the movie was that he torments Cole for no apparent reason other than the fact that he's an outcast. And whenever they try to redeem him as a character, it immediately goes back to square one. Like that scene where he offers to help Cole escape the cult members that try to kill him, only to put an eggo in his face and bail on him. Even the repercussion he got when his bike got destroyed was so minimal. So needless to say, Jeremy had no reason to be in this movie, although the best thing I would say about the relationship was that it stepped away from the enemies to lovers trope. I wasn't a fan of Melanie either. She hardly contributes to the story herself, as while she is technically Cole's best friend, she also has a crush on him as well. But we don't get to see that until halfway through the film where she kisses him. But then it's forgotten for the rest of the movie. But one odd thing about her character was that she forces Cole to go spy on B, and then when he does, she calls him a pervert, even though Melanie told him to. Fucking hell, this boy can't catch a break. But honestly, there's actually a few characters that I enjoyed. First, we have Cole, this nerdy 12-year-old who, while he lacks self-confidence at the beginning, he learns to stick up for himself while fighting back against his babysitter. Seeing as I was a huge fan of Judah Lewis, I thought this role fitted him perfectly. I was afraid that after watching him in Summer of '84 that his other character roles would be the same, seeing as how his character in that movie was completely different. But this movie did a good job in making his character likable. Instead of him being the abuser, he is instead a victim of abuse. Then we have B. She seems like an average babysitting teenager until we have yet to see the demon side of her. But honestly, Samara Weaving played the role very well here, as while B may be extremely antagonistic, she in no way, shape, or form comes across as a cunt and still remains likable, and doesn't intentionally betray Cole, despite what the film may show you. And Cole and B's relationship was without a doubt the best dynamic in the whole movie from start to finish, because it's really sweet that despite B's wrongdoings, she still deeply cares about Cole and lets him take the win. It's too bad that the trailer would really predict that she would be the main antagonist, so the scene with her first kill wasn't really all that much of a surprise. The other characters worked really well too, such as Max, who surprisingly isn't like the other cult members as he's here for the sole purpose of killing. The best thing about his character is his relationship with Cole, because he doesn't seem to hate him as much as John, Allison, or Sonia would. Throughout the entire runtime, Max tries to help Cole to fight better against his opponents, despite the fact that he wants to kill him, but he still remains a likable antagonist, and their relationship is basically that of a father-son kind of relationship. Honestly, out of all the characters that Robbie Amell played, this movie would have to be his best role yet, and he just fills it with so much fucking energy and charisma. Plus, who wouldn't be intimidated by a shirtless murderer? And do I even need to mention that they got fucking King Batch to me in this movie? I was already a fan of his vines as a young kid, but unfortunately as I got older, I realized that vines were just all around cringeworthy. Still though, I'm glad to see him in this movie as he's definitely delivered some of the funniest lines ever.
Look, man, 3 out of 4 people got an STD. I got 2 people's blood on me. You do the math, I got AIDS. I know I got AIDS.
It's a shame that he wasn't in the film for very long, because he could have been extremely humorous. As for the plot itself, it's not too anything original, although the execution of it was really well handled, because of the great characters being inserted into it. Because you can have the same story, but you shouldn't need to have the same characters because it changes depending on what types of characters are in the story. And for this movie, they did show the right kind of characters being inserted into a horror comedy. Yes, I said comedy. This movie can be very funny from time to time, especially in the scenes where it picks up the story, which makes sense considering its genre. But the scene that was the most funny was Cole using the method of dropping like a bag of rocks, tripping Max over him, and when he tries to kick his dick, he misses, despite his dick being so huge. That moment had such great pacing and timing to where I can watch it many times and still get enjoyment out of it. The effects in this film are really well done, and considering it's a horror film, comedy or not, you know that most of it is going to be filled with blood and gore. And anytime I would watch that when I'm seeing a specific horror movie for the first time, I would always get the chills just from seeing hyper-realism being shown. However, the blood imagery in The Babysitter is shown at least half the time, which I understand since we need a lot of time for scenes and characters to breathe in certain areas. Overall, The Babysitter, despite some of its flaws, was still a pleasant experience to sit through, and Mick G knocked it out of the park with the direction of it. The film did from mediocre to decent in ratings. It received a 72% on Rotten Tomatoes and has made well over $400,000 in the box office, which to me is undeserved because I feel like the movie should be appreciated more for how much effort was thrown into it. Because when it first came out, it felt like it could be a huge success, and I can tell the producers tried their best to make sure the film can look as good as it can be. And for about 80% of the time, they did. It can be brought down at times with some of its characters, but it's rewatchable. But despite its mixed reviews and making very little money, they had to make a sequel, which leads up to this movie. She's a killer queen, got body check. On September 2019, just a year prior to its release, a sequel to The Babysitter was just announced as The Babysitter Killer Queen, clever title by the way, and was slated to release on September 10th, 2020. Truth be told, this wasn't something I expected to happen. I honestly thought that the first movie would just be a singular film that would end on a cliffhanger, and that its continuation would be a mystery to this day. But surprisingly, I knew about this movie when its trailer released, and I was already hooked on what I'm about to experience next. So I took it upon myself to watch the movie again, and it was okay, but a bit disappointing. Taking place 2 years after the events of the first movie, Cole is seen as a junior in high school. It's interesting how this movie came out when I was a senior as well, so it was like I was growing up with Cole as he's seen as the most relatable character in the movie. So after his experience with B, he tries to convince everyone that he didn't make it all up, and nobody believes him except Melanie. But since his parents are gonna send him to a psychiatric school, he escapes with Melanie alongside her new boyfriend Jimmy, and their friends Boom Boom and Diego to join a lake party. You can see from the very start that they've decided to add new characters in the movie a little too early. And just like the first, they don't really seem to take the proper time to introduce them, so they just feel sorta there. Anyways, during their time on the boat, they decided to play a party game that involved two people kissing in the closet, which even as a teenager it was hard to watch. Just seeing Cole and Melanie make out for 2 minutes was so fucking unbearable to see. But then things get interesting when Melanie starts to bring up the Devil's Book, which catches Cole off guard as he doesn't seem to remember to have told that to Melanie. But then this happens.
How do you know about the book, Melanie?
Because I signed my name in it, Cole.
Well, who didn't see that coming? Well, I'll tell you who. Me. It's honestly so strange that they had to introduce Melanie as the main antagonist of the movie, despite its predecessor not even foreshadowing her evil traits, as all she was just a plot device that didn't appear much. But honestly, the trailer did a much better job than the first movie, where they would just hide the antagonist as opposed to revealing it, thus making it predictable. Because I seriously thought it was just gonna be a buddy adventure movie where Melanie teams up with Cole, so good on you, McG, for keeping the big reveal anonymous. But anyways, it's then revealed that Melanie, Jimmy, and Diego are also part of a cult too, and they, of course, need Cole's blood in order for them to become powerful, because they need the blood for the sacrifice to be mixed with the blood of the innocent. However, it's been revealed that Max, John, Allison, and Sonia make a return here. At first it may sound weird to kill them off in the first movie then bring them back again, but it's interesting when it's revealed that yes, they are dead, but they're given until sunrise to complete their goal or they have to die for another 2 years to try again. So Cole has to fight back yet again, but during the adventure he meets up with a new character named Phoebe Atwell, played by Jenna Ortega, as she seems to believe Cole about the cult being evil, or as she likes to call it.
Update me on the Psycho Breakfast Club.
So after they end up killing most of the cult members, they begin hiding in Phoebe's family cabin, where they take refuge and hope to wait out the night. But after realizing that Melanie is still giving chase, they decide to come out of the bunker armed with crossbows. But this fails as Melanie captures Phoebe and holds her hostage, and so Cole must rescue her. But in order for that to happen, he offers her a sample of his blood. But then something that actually shocked me was B coming out of the water and was revealed to be Phoebe's babysitter, which I guess the first movie did foreshadow, seeing as how B babysat many other kids before Cole. And it was also revealed that she made a deal with the devil to save Phoebe's life in exchange for her soul after she died. So she wasn't all that bad from the start. But then the cult members are resurrected again, as they drink the blood of Cole mixed with Boom Boom's blood. However, the ritual backfires as they needed innocent blood. But since Cole started making out with Phoebe, it's not exactly making him innocent. B, who did not drink the blood, reveals that she orchestrated everything so that Cole and Phoebe could unite and defeat the cult, having had a change of heart after Cole's love confession after her initial defeat. However, since B is still technically a demon, she drinks the blood and disintegrates to save the two. The movie then ends with Cole's dad showing up, now realizing that Cole didn't make up the story, now believing him. However, during the mid-credits scene, the book is lying in the sand near the lake when an unknown person comes upon the book, possibly hinting for a continuation. Honestly, I thought this movie had a much bigger scope compared to the first, with a much bigger setting and tone. The action scenes are still the highlight, but now it's amped up to 11 with making deaths more gruesome than ever. I feel like at times it can get a bit exaggerated, but it doesn't entirely feel unnecessary. I mean, the characters brought it upon themselves, so you know it was well deserved. The story was pretty neat as well, and it really helped with a ton of locations as well, as opposed to the first movie which was only shown in one location, Cole's neighborhood. Which, don't get me wrong, I like the story in that movie, but at the same time you can't really tell a ton of stories if you're just limited to one location, especially if the stories are so huge. So it was nice for Killer Queen to spice things up a bit. The characters are about the same as before, although some of them have been given bigger roles now, like Melanie, who despite her evil nature coming out of nowhere, I do think she was handled well here. She wasn't as good of an antagonist as B, but I still found her character pretty charming. And the rest of the cult members were pretty much the same as before, just a lot more violent. Although the best thing about it was when we get to see their backstories on why they are the way they are. And while their interests such as making music and being a journalist were established in the first movie, I honestly had no idea that it would be part of their backstories, so I thought that was a neat thing to see. Although some of the new members of the cult don't really seem to have much of a purpose. They don't exactly do anything, they just stand around like blocks of wood, so they really had no intention of being incorporated here. And I was pretty satisfied that Jeremy wasn't in this movie, as he realized that he couldn't bully Cole anymore in the first, so he finally left him alone and was never seen again. But one character that had less spotlight than Melanie in the first movie was Cole's dad Archie, so they decided to make him contribute to the story little in the second, as he's also under the impression that Cole is going going crazy, but he doesn't come across as an asshole, instead tries to help him out. It definitely made him pretty likable, and he ended up believing Cole at the end. Nice. And Cole was about the same as before, but despite him growing up, he's 10 times more petrified than he was before. But unfortunately, it didn't bring out his angry side like the first movie did when he was calling out B. But Cole is alright here, and he's a lot more determined than ever, as he's gotten smarter with everything that gets thrown at him, knowing that he's experienced it before. The only character I wasn't a fan of, and I do think she's the weakest character of the movie, is Jenna Ortega as Phoebe. Basically, earlier in the movie, she comes into the classroom, and she goes on to tell the class a bunch of lies, such as being pregnant. While looking at her character from the start, I thought she was being serious. Silly me. But they decided to treat her as a main character to team up with Cole after witnessing the brutal death of Boom Boom. But her character could have used a lot of work. Phoebe is such a bitch in this, and a lot of scenes really show it. Her relationship with Cole starts off as Phoebe hating the idea of them working together, and then her leaving him behind, all while maintaining the cynical attitude towards him. I get that it wasn't fair for Cole to jump to conclusions by assuming Phoebe would be the big bad. Hell, I thought she would be the big bad of this movie, but I couldn't entirely blame him for this because everyone that he's ever encountered or interacted with were incredibly rude and dismissive towards him, and Phoebe was not much different at all. She never really seems to think highly of Cole. In fact, most of her opinion of him is just all around negativity, and she hardly feels any remorse for it. The only time she did is when she apologized to Cole for bailing on him, but Cole was like, "No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have dragged you into the situation," and then she admits that it wasn't the first time she saw someone die, knowing what she witnessed before she met Cole. But honestly, the apology she gave didn't feel enough, considering that she did a lot more than just leaving Cole behind. But I believe the worst aspect of Phoebe, and I can't stress this enough, is how the film tries way too hard to make her the most relatable character of the whole movie, as if that wasn't painfully obvious with how deep they make her. Like, she has stated many times that she can be just as much of a weirdo and a loner as Cole. She even keeps on bringing up her family life and how it has changed her. But since we never get to see much evidence in those areas, I hardly buy it, and I can only assume it was added as an excuse for the audience to sympathize with her. I would somewhat understand if Phoebe's snarky nature was only used at the beginning of the movie, and she would become likable in the second and third act where she feels remorseful for how she acted. But because she's so one-dimensional and a bit edgy, she's just shown as this one-note badass, but doesn't contribute all that much. I know saying all this will make it feel like I'm the only one who despises Phoebe, and that's exactly what it is. I've seen a lot of people praising her as one of the best characters of the movie, with comments such as, "Damn, she's the best. She's naturally beautiful and she's badass. I love her style in the movie. She carried the movie. I love her. Phoebe is so hot. I have a crush on her. Phoebe is the best dadass #1. Now, I'm not saying you can't like Phoebe as a character. In fact, I'm in full support if you do, but just come up with a valid reason that you think this character is so memorable, instead of complimenting her without expanding it. And I'm sure nobody has touched this, but Phoebe just feels like a Max Mayfield knockoff. You can't tell me otherwise from what I've seen from her. But at least with Max, at least on season 4 of Stranger Things, they finally gave her a reason to be in it that isn't just being a plot device. Sure, her personality is still the same, but at least they made an effort to make her stand out more than most of the others, for better or for worse. Anyways, that's my issue with Phoebe, and I think she's a shit character with no development whatsoever. And the fucking pop culture references are seriously getting old. It wasn't that bad in the first movie, because since they wouldn't be referencing shit all that much, you would easily look past them. But Killer Queen is seriously obsessed with making twice as many references as the first, that they wouldn't want you to forget. Like how they bring up Terminator 2 every 5 minutes, and I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? I'll give the movie credit for at least making them separate from the story and not have it be part of the main focus. Now that's not to say that all of their references are bad. There were a few ones I liked, such as Tommy Two-Tone's song 8675309, but I feel like the movie should be remembered for its memorable jokes and characters instead of pulling something that's not gonna remind people of another property they know. In the end, despite some of my issues towards Babysitter Killer Queen, I still ended up enjoying it. It's too bad that the film didn't do as well as the first and got very low ratings, and got a ton of negative backlash from critics, calling the film uninspired and embarrassing. But there were a few people such as myself that begged to differ, and I thought the movie was much more entertaining than the first, but that was mainly due to the fact that it had a lot more action in it, although it was let down by a host of new characters that didn't do much of anything. So maybe you could argue that this movie was pointless or not. Maybe you would have wanted it to end on a cliffhanger, but we gotta have some kind of continuation, right? So yeah, that was the Babysitter film series review. I gotta say, I had no interest in seeing them because they seemed very generic at first, but they turned out to be better than I expected, so much so that I was kind of expecting more. Mick G has spoken about the idea for a third movie being made, but he doesn't want the audience demanding it, otherwise it wouldn't be made at all. But he's open to making another entry to the series, given how much he enjoyed it. But despite its negative backlash from critics in almost every corner, I highly doubt it would ever be confirmed, although according to the Wikipedia it is getting developed. But we haven't really gotten any hints other than the post-credits scene from the second movie, so it's undecided on whether or not this movie would leave unanswered. But if it did happen, then hopefully it'll have the charm the first movie had where they're just focusing on telling a simple story, rather than just making unnecessary introductions with new characters. And despite me liking the story in the second movie, at its worst I would say they keep on bringing irrelevant shit, especially with the references they throw at you, as an excuse to be like, oh, Terminator 2 is really good. If you're ever interested in seeing these movies, I highly recommend checking out the first, as it does a good job in establishing most of the stuff in it, minus some of its characters. Then go check out the second and see which of the two is better. My rankings for these movies would be an 8 out of 10 for The Babysitter, and a 7 out of 10 for Killer Queen. I've been Burster, and happy Halloween to you all.
Scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul, seal your doom tonight. Spooky, scary skeletons speak with such a screech. You'll shake and shudder in surprise when you hear these zombies shriek. We're so sorry, skeletons, you're so misunderstood. You only want to socialize.